For me, it was a lot of the, just before you get started, you know, people ask me, well, why didn't you start doing, you know, why didn't you go for like school board or something more modest, you know, before you ran for Congress? And I just want to say, I mean, I think women, you know, there's this, and I don't know whether we do this to ourselves or not, but I think we need to get past the mentality of like waiting our turn.
100%.
So yeah, just start off with that, but yeah. So I'm happy to do anything to, you know, get past that.
I completely agree. So I guess my first question is just a general, like, why do you think it's so imperative for young women to understand the importance of leadership and initiative?
Well, I think if we don't, then I think other people will make decisions for us when we're, you know, older. So I don't want to, this isn't like a gender thing, but, you know, boys and young men are like encouraged to, you know, sort of be bold and seek out these positions and just, you know, even break a few eggs if they think they're, you know, doing the right thing, and we're not, right? And I don't know if it's a societal thing, it's a cultural thing. It might be a little bit of a cultural thing, but I think we have to spend, you know, my mother's generation kind of burned their bras, right? My generation became a little complacent in thinking that, okay, all our rights are protected, but they weren't. And I think your generation's realizing that we can't be complacent. And I think if we don't, then we should be prepared to have other people make decisions on our behalf.
Yeah, 100%. And like, why should we let them make decisions for us, right?
Right.
Exactly. So have you ever faced challenges as a female leader, because you've had so much experience in both the business and political world? So like, could you just like maybe give a few examples of those?
Oh yeah. I mean, where do I start? That's like 2 hours worth of a conversation. You know, the thing that jumps into my head as soon as you asked me that question was my first job out of school. This is like early 90s, right? And I had just graduated college. And I worked at on Wall Street in a firm that managed money for, you know, very wealthy entities, individuals, companies, family offices, stuff like that. And I liked pantsuits. They're just more comfortable than skirts for me. And so I, you know, got a little bit of money, bought myself a couple of pantsuits, which I was pretty proud of, and I would wear them in the office. And the office manager, who was a woman, you know, middle-aged woman at the time, brought me aside and said to me, you know, our clients really would prefer to see you in a skirt. I mean, it was just like, and I was like, what? I'm like, wouldn't our clients prefer me to be smart and manage their portfolios, you know, in the right way rather than to see me in a skirt? So that was like, it was just an incredible moment for me because at that moment I realized, I'm like, oh, wow, we still have a really long way to go. You know, other things, my entire career, I mean, can be summed up by saying that I've always had to be much more qualified than my male counterparts in order to get to where they are. I was just such a, you know, like sort of like a unicorn almost, right? Anybody, and a woman who was as aggressive as her male counterparts was seen as an oddity, to the, you know, to the extent that, like, you know, I've had people come up to me, you know, and I don't know what, this is like completely, I mean, bigoted. They're like, oh my God, are you a lesbian? You know, like one of those things, right? Is that why you're so aggressive? Because you're like some sort of angry lesbian? And I'm like, what are you talking about? You know? So there we have to, so that's sort of, and I don't necessarily blame them. They grew up probably with mothers who were not like us. And I think once we start, you know, sort of giving our sons more examples of like strong women, those questions and that mentality goes away. And that mentality affects a lot of things. It affects everything from like hiring decisions, promotion decisions, you know, anything like that. And I was lucky enough in my career to have had a mentor who understood me, you know, who understood the fact that I was aggressive and that I did want to, you know, sort of advance my career. And I also, you know, I made a deal with him early on in my career. This is like over 20 years ago at this point, Carol. I said, you know, our company was going through a reorganization and they needed like an MBA to basically pull a bunch of units together and, you know, combine operations, which was a big job. And they were prepared to pay high high six-figure salaries to find somebody who could be their chief operating officer. And I walked into his office and I said to him, Steve, give me a chance. This is like right after business school, right? I said, give me a chance. I think I can do this. And oh, by the way, if you give me 6 months of this, if I don't do a good job, feel free to fire me, because I know you're going to need a scapegoat to, answer to the board of this company. And he took a chance on me, but I also took a chance too, right? I made a deal with him. I said, fire me if I don't do a good job. And that sort of risk-taking behavior, I think, is something also that I want to see more women sort of take on, right? I see a lot of my counterparts sort of playing it safe, and I don't think playing it safe isn't necessarily, the right thing to do, especially if you're like early on in your 20s, you're early in your career. You could stand to lose a job, right? If you're not supporting a family and all that stuff, right? So stuff like that.
No, I 100% agree. And like, to be honest, when you said the skirt thing, I've been told that, and I'm only in high school.
Oh my God. That's ridiculous.
And like, I think that has a lot of impacts on like young women's confidence. And I was doing some reading about like, there's like this esteemed like confidence gap between men and women almost.
Yep.
What do you think the root cause of that is, and what do you think we might be able to do to combat that?
I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. I would imagine something like that starts in childhood somehow. And I grew up, your typical Greek family is very patriarchal, right? The sons are put ahead of the girls and everything. I grew up in a very atypical Greek family. My father was an orphan. I had no brothers, and I was naturally aggressive to begin with. So he encouraged that, right, in me. And so at a very young age, I was encouraged to take risks.
So you talked about your family, and I kind of want to shift a little bit towards some questions more specific to you. So I read on the Brand New Congress website that like you were very inspired by your parents actually like entering the business world. Can you expand a tiny bit about that? Like what exactly how exactly did you look up to them? And what were some of the other like female leaders maybe that you looked up to when you were growing up?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Look, my parents barely knew English. They basically came to a country where they knew no one, with whatever, a couple $100s in their pockets. That takes an enormous amount of like risk-taking behavior to do, and a lot of immigrants are like that, right? That really inspired me, because, if my mother can like hop on a boat, and she came over on a boat, not on an airplane because the boat tickets are cheaper. She would tell me these stories too. They first emigrated to Canada because it was just easier back then to go to Canada and then to the US. She gets into the port in Canada. She gets off the boat. She doesn't know a soul in Canada. So she's in Toronto. She goes to a phone booth, looks up, and then starts looking up Greek gynecologists, because she knew enough English, and she was a midwife. Okay. She was a midwife, right? And in Europe, most babies are delivered by midwives, unlike here. So she just started, and she started calling people at random, quite literally just started calling people at random. I explained to them who she was, what her circumstances are, and will you give me a job? Because I need a job. And that's sort of that, like, can you imagine doing that? Like somebody plopping you on a different planet, you barely know the language. And then you're like, trying to figure out, where your next meal is coming from, but you need money. Right. And then, my father came over sort of separately after that. So my mother actually was the one that came over first and established sort of a bit of a foothold in North America. And then my father came over, and that was like, wow, right. For my mother. She was also, she would tell me these stories, and as a child, she grew up in a village full of like Nazis. She had two sisters and a brother. So she had 3 siblings, and the 3 sisters, between the 3 of them, would share one winter coat, and they didn't have shoes. So my grandmother would take old tires, quite literally, measure their feet, cut out the rubber from the tires, and like sew on like burlap strips to create shoes for the kids, right? And she told me these stories, and I just like, this was just like mind blowing for somebody, you know, for me, like, I'm like, how resourceful was my grandmother? And then my mother, who happened to be an exceptionally bright woman, you know, did really well. The family identified her, and she had a brother too. So I have to give credit to my grandparents for not promoting her brother ahead of her. But they saw that she was particularly bright. They spent all their resources sending her to the mainland. She grew up on an island in Greece, to the mainland, where she stayed with my great grandparents, literally sleeping on the floors, going to midwifery school. And she would not go to lunch with her classmates, you know, graduated top of her class. And, you know, and just, you know, she could have had a very good career in Athens as a midwife, but met my father, and they both kind of wanted to come to the United States, because that's what you did back, you know, in the 60s. You know, especially if you were very poor. And, you know, they took all these risks just to give my sister and I a better life, you know. And it even goes back, my grandfather and my mother's father had hid somebody from the Nazis during World War II at great danger, you know, to his own family, because if he was discovered hiding somebody that the Nazis were trying to, you know, track down, the entire family would be taken out to the street and shot, you know, dead, because that's what they did. So you know, you grow up with stories like this, you can't help but like think, I'm like, well, if they were able to do all that, you know, the least thing I could do is sort of be, you know, be aggressive in my job and try to get ahead, right? So yeah, I don't, you know, there's a lot of family stories like that. But yeah, then that was inspiring to me.
Awesome. And like, yeah, I think that like everyone who's grown up in like an immigrant household like understands the kind of risks that like families take.
Yeah.
And so we kind of grow up with that mentality that like, yeah, like you articulated that perfectly. Like if they can do all of that, like then why can't we just go out a little more? I think that's incredible. I guess shifting gears a tiny bit. So I first got into your campaign actually because I come from a family of scientists. Like my family has been in science for like so long, and then my dad actually has spent the better part of a decade trying to reduce air pollutants using chemistry and stuff. So climate change and like believing in science, like all of those issues, like super big deal for my family. And so when I found out that you were like a politician that like ran on a very like climate change like focused platform, that was really important for me, and I wanted to help as much as I could. But I was actually wondering like when you first got into like environmental advocacy, and like how did you start your activism?
So my look, I was always kind of like, I went to Stuyvesant High School. I don't know if you, it's in New York, it's a science high school. So I kind of always been a bit of a science nerd. And as any reasonably intelligent scientist will, you know, you can't deny what's happening. I mean, it's not that hard to figure it out, right? And I'd always been a bit of an environmentalist. I think, you know, even like when I was a COO, we did like, you know, we did things to reduce our electricity use, we did things to reduce our paper use, our water use, all that stuff, our power use. But I really didn't get active into it until the 2016 election, right? I, like most other people, thought Hillary Clinton would win, and we would do something, you know, about the environment boldly. You know, boy, was I mistaken. And so you know, Trump wins, you know, I'm like I spent a couple of days in complete shock. And after that, I was like, I started going to meetings, and I'm like, which environmental organization do I join that's going to have like, who's the most effective, right? Who's the most effective at getting stuff done? And, you know, invariably I got, a lot of people told me, oh, you should check out Citizens Climate Lobby. Citizens Climate Lobby is a national organization that has chapters in every single congressional district in this country. And they lobby Congress on one very specific small thing about climate change, and that's really to put a proper price on carbon, right? Because carbon's got a whole bunch of externalities, and it's just not priced properly for the damage it's doing to our planet. And I thought, oh, interesting. Okay, so let me reach out to these people, you know, and they've had, and I like the fact that they work with both, you know, progressives to like conservatives, you know, and people who, you know, you get some conservatives who are very, you know, very aware of what's going on. The messaging is very different, obviously, to a conservative than it is to somebody like me, a progressive. But, you know, I basically sent in my resume. I say, listen, I want to do something about the climate. Here's my resume. Just put me to use. A month or two later, I get a phone call. Do you want to join our board? Like their national board. So I'm like, sure, I'll join your national board. So I'm on I'm their finance chairperson right now, and I sit on their board. But that the activism for me to run for, and I thought I was doing enough, right? So I left Wall Street. I went into clean energy. I'm like, okay, I'm going to tackle it from this perspective. I'm really going to drive, I'm going to put my skills to use and really drive down the cost of renewables in my little renewable hydrogen space, right? Because there's like a ton of renewables. And then I read the UN's IPCC report, we're going to hell. And I'm like, what the hell has Pascal been doing? He's been sleepwalking, through the last quarter century, right? And we knew about it, right? We knew that this was coming. And so there's no excuse. This isn't a surprise to anybody, right? Who's been paying attention. And he should be paying attention. And so I'm like, this guy's like in his mid 80s, all due respect to Pascal, he's going to be long dead by the time my, 7-year-old son is going to have to deal with like, food shortages in another 60 years. So I decided to run, and I knew it was an uphill battle because, New Jersey's got its own set of very particular obstacles in the ballot design. But that's kind of, I didn't see the leaders who I relied on to do something about it were not showing leadership. And that was unacceptable to me. And it was, as a mother, it was completely unacceptable, right? Because your first instinct as a mother is to protect your kids. And so I'm like, you know what? F it. If he's not going to do it, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to push him and badger him. And even if I don't win, we moved him to the left on some significant progressive issues. In any event, look, when your leaders are negligent in their really one job, right? It's time for them to be replaced. Now, New Jersey's has its own set of issues, like you probably know, but I couldn't sit idly by and do nothing.
That's so reassuring to be able to hear from someone like you. Like there's people like that are fighting for our generation and fighting for our future. I think that's so reassuring to hear as a young person. And I think like just listening to you speak about all of these issues, you're so passionate about so many different things, and all of them are like with the same message of I want to help people and I want to dismantle a system that has been so corrupt and has helped politicians like win in the past that I don't really want to handle anymore. And so like, again, I think throughout your life you have taken so many risks, but like they have all been to better the lives of others, and that's just so inspiring. And I think you're doing amazing work. And like I said, as a young person, like knowing that there's someone like you fighting for us and like fighting for a system that is not corrupt and fighting for a system where we'll have better climate change policies, I think that's just so reassuring to hear. And I'm sure your children and other young people feel the same way.